Hi, my name is Alexis. And my parents did the unthinkable. They banned me from my own family's $310 million will. For years, they controlled me, making sure I never got a dime. But when security told me, this estate belongs to her, everything changed. They thought they could shut me out, but I'm about to turn their world upside down. The truth they've been hiding will blow their minds. What do you think happens next? Hook 2. Imagine being cut out of a $310 million inheritance by the people who should love you most. That's exactly what my parents did, until security told me, this estate belongs to her. Now, I'm standing here, ready to take back everything they tried to steal from me. The secrets they've kept, the lies they've fed me. It's all coming to light. What happens when the truth finally comes out? I had never wanted the empire, just my father's approval. But I couldn't even get that. My name is Alexis Harper. I'm 34 years old, and I'm an art restorer living in Chicago. To most people, I'm just another woman in a modest apartment with a career that doesn't quite pay as much as the flashy office jobs or the successful real estate careers my family is known for. But to me, my job brings peace. It's just enough to make ends meet, and it's fulfilling in its own quiet way. Yet, there's always the nagging feeling, I'm never enough. Not in the eyes of my father. Growing up, I always felt like the black sheep of the family. My father, Richard Whitmore, is a towering figure in Chicago's real estate market. He runs a multi-million-dollar empire that everyone reveres, and yet, here I am, working with old furniture in a small apartment filled with art supplies and old books. No grand mansion, no luxury cars. Just the sound of paintbrushes against wood and the quiet hum of my thoughts as I try to restore pieces of the past, hoping for some recognition, even if only from myself. But it's never been enough. I've spent my whole life trying to please my father, trying to gain his validation, but it's like chasing a mirage. He's always looked at my work with disdain, his voice dripping with disappointment every time he speaks about it. You'll never amount to anything, Harper, he would say. If you had any real ambition, you'd run the business. But you prefer to fix old furniture. What a waste. I knew my father's view of me, and yet, I still longed for his approval. It felt like I was standing in a room full of people who were allowed to take up space, while I was left in the corner, unseen and unheard. This ongoing internal struggle with my father was just the beginning of the rift between us. His unspoken expectations were like a chain that kept me tethered to his vision for me, even as I tried to build my own life, even as I worked to carve out my identity in a world where his expectations loomed large. It was on the evening of my father's 70th birthday that the real devastation began. The family had gathered for the celebration at his mansion in the heart of Chicago. The grandiose space was filled with family members, old friends, and business associates, each laughing, smiling, and exchanging pleasantries. As usual, I was on the outskirts, watching it all unfold, feeling like I didn't quite belong. My siblings, successful, polished, everything my father wanted, mingled with ease, but I was left to nurse my quiet resentment in the background. The tension in my chest grew tighter with every laugh, every congratulatory word that was thrown at my brothers and sisters. I was supposed to be part of this. But instead, I was just there. As the evening wore on, my father called me over. I could feel his cold gaze pierce through me, but I approached anyway, knowing it was inevitable. "Alexis, you're still at it with your little restoration hobby, aren't you?" he asked, his tone dripping with sarcasm. How quaint. I wanted to scream. To tell him that I had more to offer than this, that I wasn't just the person he thought I was. But the words stuck in my throat. Instead, I just smiled weakly, fighting the sting of his words. The dinner proceeded, and it wasn't long before things took a turn I couldn't have predicted. We were all seated at the table when my father stood, raising his glass in a toast. I thought maybe, just maybe, this was going to be the moment he finally acknowledged me, showed a sliver of warmth. But as he turned his attention toward me, my heart sank. "You're a disgrace to the family name," he spat, his voice echoing through the cavernous dining room. "I'm cutting you from the $310 million will. You'll get nothing. You're a failure. You always will be." I froze. My breath hitched. The words were out before I could process them, and they stung deeper than any insult. It wasn't just a declaration. It was the destruction of everything I had tried to achieve, everything I had hoped for. The room fell silent. Then came the slap. I didn't even see it coming. The sharp sting on my cheek was like the final blow, not just to my face, but to my entire existence. The laughter from the guests felt like it vibrated in my bones as they pulled out their phones, recording the scene. I could hear their whispered remarks. Some were sympathetic, others were amused. But all I could focus on was the cold, hollow feeling in my chest. My life had just become a spectacle. I stumbled back, my cheek still burning, the sting not fading. The humiliation was consuming. I turned and left the table, my hands shaking, the eyes of every single person at that party trained on me. I ran out into the cold night, feeling every eye on me, and as I heard the sound of my father's voice fade, I knew my life had just shattered. I woke up to the relentless buzz of my phone, the screen lighting up with a string of notifications. The world outside my window was the same as it always had been, yet everything inside of me felt different. The events of the night before, the slap, the humiliation, my father's cutting words, had turned everything upside down. I felt a deep sense of shame, but somewhere beneath that, there was something else, something I hadn't expected: resolve. This couldn't be the end of my story. It just couldn't. I reached for my phone, the weight of it in my hand like a heavy anchor. The first thing I saw was a video, me, frozen in place, as my father slapped me in front of the entire family. The laughter, the camera flashes, the coldness in his eyes as he cut me out of the will. It was all right there, recorded for the world to see. And then I heard it again in my mind, his voice repeating the words that stung far worse than any physical pain: cut off from the $310 million will. The video was already going viral. 100 comments, 1,000 shares. My humiliation was now a spectacle. I let the phone slip from my fingers and fell back against my pillow. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. My chest felt tight, suffocating under the weight of the betrayal. But as the initial shock began to ebb away, the anger began to rise. Anger at my father, at the family that had never really seen me. Anger at myself for being too quiet for too long, for letting them get away with it. It stung, I thought, rubbing my cheek where his slap still throbbed. But not as much as the thought that maybe I had been too quiet for too long. Before I could spiral any further into self-pity, there was a knock at my door. I forced myself to get up. Who could be here? The night before had been a mess, a public disgrace. The last thing I needed was more attention. Yet, curiosity tugged at me as I walked to the door. When I opened it, I was met by a group of neatly dressed individuals. Their serious expressions did little to calm the unease building in my stomach. "Alexis Harper?" the lead lawyer asked, her voice clipped, but not unkind. "I'm Judith Blackwell. We've been trying to reach you." I didn't say anything at first. My mind raced. Lawyers? What the hell could they want? I felt my heart start to beat faster. "Do you mind if we come in?" Judith asked, holding up a business card. I nodded, stepping aside to let them enter. They all filed in, and Judith handed me a file. It was thick, heavy, and as I opened it, the first thing that hit me was a birth certificate, my birth certificate. "Alexis, we represent your biological father. He's been searching for you for 35 years. The words didn't make sense. Biological father? I stared at her, my mind struggling to process the flood of information. "You were kidnapped as a baby," she continued. "Your real name isn't Alexis Whitmore. It's Alexis Carver." The world seemed to shift under my feet. I stumbled back a step, the file slipping from my hands. "What? What do you mean?" I whispered. "Your birth name," Judith said gently, "is not Whitmore. You were taken from your real parents when you were only 6 months old." I was living someone else's life. A life built on lies. My entire identity, everything I thought I knew, had been stolen from me. She flipped the page of the file and showed me the rest: photos, documents, even a family tree, all confirming the story that felt like it was being ripped from a novel. It was too much to absorb all at once. "My life, the one I've known, was built on a lie," I murmured. "I wasn't even supposed to be here." Judith's voice softened. "Your biological parents, Magnus and Eleanor Carver, have been searching for you ever since you were taken. They never stopped looking for you." I felt a wave of nausea wash over me. How was I supposed to process this? I was just a piece in a puzzle that had been rearranged without my knowledge. The family I had known, my father, my siblings, none of them were truly mine. They had been strangers to me, just as I had been a stranger to them. But something else clawed at me, something deeper than confusion or betrayal. What if my father's rejection wasn't about me? What if it had nothing to do with who I was, but with who I wasn't? Maybe they were never my family. Maybe that's why they could turn their backs on me without a second thought. They never really saw me. They saw what they wanted to see. The thought gnawed at me, turning everything I had known into dust. The life I thought I had, the one I tried to make work, was all a facade. And then, as I sat there in that sterile room with the lawyers, it hit me, I had no idea who I was. Not really. I had lived in a world of lies, trying to please people who didn't care about me. And now, with this truth, I had no choice but to face the reality that my whole life was a story written by someone else. But what now? The decision loomed ahead of me. Did I face this new reality? Was I ready to confront my past, or should I let it go and let this new truth fade away into the ether? As I was about to close the file, Judith's phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen before turning to me. "Magnus Carver is downstairs," she said. "He's been waiting for you. He hasn't seen you in 35 years. I hesitated. The weight of everything felt unbearable, and yet, part of me, deep down, knew I had to see him. I had to know the truth. I stood up, my legs shaking. It's time I stop running from the truth and face it head on, no matter how painful it is, I whispered to myself. I gathered my things, my hands trembling. I took one last look at my apartment, at the life I'd known, and then stepped out into the unknown. I stood in front of the mirror, unsure of what to wear. The clothes in my closet felt like someone else's wardrobe, too expensive, too polished, not fitting for what I was about to face. How do you prepare for a meeting with the man who is supposed to be your father, but who you've never met? How do you act when everything you thought you knew about your life was just gone? A million thoughts raced through my mind, and yet, there was only one question I kept coming back to: what if he's just another version of them? Another lie I'll have to unearth? I could feel the nerves creeping up on me. My hands trembled as I reached for the shirt that had once belonged to someone else, my old self. The self I was trying to leave behind, but couldn't, not yet. A deep breath. My reflection stared back at me, and for a moment, I wished I could disappear. I had no choice now but to go. The truth, as painful as it was waiting for me. This meeting, this moment, could change everything. With one last look at myself, I made my way out of the apartment. The air outside was brisk, and it bit at my skin as I walked towards the waiting car. I was leaving behind my old life, but what if what awaited me was even worse? The drive felt like an eternity. The world outside seemed to blur, the city streets stretching endlessly as I thought about the man I was about to meet. The one who was supposed to be my father. When the car stopped, I was met by a security guard. He was tall, dressed in black, and had a face that could not have been more serious. He asked for my ID, his expression betraying nothing. The estate was immense. The driveway stretched for what felt like miles, the mansion towering over me, all grandeur and history. My heart was racing, but there was something else, something that felt like a mix of recognition and dread. This was supposed to be my home. The mansion felt foreign, cold even, but as I walked inside, there was a strange pull. Like I had always belonged here. But how could that be? How could I belong to a place that never once saw me as anything more than a stranger? I was ushered inside, and there, standing in the grand entrance, was Magnus. He was older than I'd imagined, his hair graying and his face lined with age, but his eyes were full of recognition, a recognition that sent chills down my spine. The resemblance was uncanny, like staring into the face of someone I should have known, but didn't. "I've waited a lifetime for this moment," Magnus said, his voice thick with emotion. I didn't know what to say. What do you say when you meet the man who is supposed to be your father after 35 years of nothing? After all this time, he was standing in front of me, and I didn't know if I should hug him, cry, or turn away. But the words that left his lips made everything feel so much heavier. "You were never meant to be taken from us," Magnus said, his eyes searching mine. The room felt smaller. The air thinner. I wanted to collapse, but I stayed standing. He stepped closer, his hands shaking slightly as he reached into his coat pocket. From the pocket, he pulled out a letter and handed it to me. My name was written on it in elegant handwriting, the ink faded with age. It was from my biological mother. The weight of it hit me harder than I could have imagined. This was a letter from the woman who had given birth to me, the woman I'd never known. "We were just trying to protect you from what was coming," Magnus continued. "I never meant for it to end like this." My hands shook as I opened the letter. The paper felt fragile in my fingers, and I had to fight back the tears as I read the words written by a woman who had never had the chance to raise me. "To my dear Alexis, the day will come when you will find out the truth. It may hurt, but it is the only way you will understand. You were taken to protect you, to save you from what was to come. I hope you can forgive us when you know everything. And when the time is right, you will find us. You are loved, always." The letter didn't just bring me to tears, it shattered whatever was left of the life I thought I knew. My whole existence had been built on a lie, and now, the truth was staring me in the face. I felt a wave of anger mixed with a deep sadness. For the first time in my life, I felt like I was being pulled in two directions. The family I had known, the Whitmores, were never really my family. I had been an outsider, discarded when I no longer fit into their plans. And now, here was the family I never knew. The family who wanted me back. But the betrayal of the Whitmores hurt. It stung more than the slap that had set everything in motion. And I couldn't simply forgive that. Magnus, noticing my struggle, reached for a photo album from a nearby table. He handed it to me, and as I flipped through the pages, I saw myself, small, smiling, in a life I had no memory of. A life I had been stolen from. I wasn't supposed to be here. I wasn't supposed to be with the Whitmores. But here I was, trying to make sense of everything. "I never wanted to hurt you," Magnus said softly, "but there are things beyond our control. Things we couldn't protect you from." I stared at the photos of myself as a child. The family I had, the life I had, all of it was nothing more than a dream stolen from me. And then, as if a weight had been placed on my chest, I realized the truth: the Whitmores weren't my family. They were the people who took everything from me. They were the ones who cast me aside without a second thought. But now I had a chance to go back. A chance to find who I was supposed to be. And yet, the pull of the life I'd lived, even the pain it had caused, was still there. "I don't know who I am anymore," I said, my voice breaking. "Do I belong here? With you? Or with them?" Magnus looked at me, his gaze filled with a mix of understanding and sorrow. "You don't have to choose right now," he said, his voice steady. "But I'm not going anywhere." I took a deep breath. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know where I was headed. But I knew one thing: I had to find out. The truth weighed on me like an anchor, pulling me down with every word Magnus had spoken. My hands shook as I stared at the letter, the one from my biological mother. I didn't know if it was a blessing or a curse, but everything that had once felt certain was now uncertain. My life had been built on lies. Every decision, every relationship, every year I'd lived had been a part of a twisted game I never wanted to play. I needed to understand why. Why was I taken from the family I was supposed to belong to? And why, after everything, was I being thrown back into this mess? Magnus had tried to explain, but the more I heard, the angrier I became. The Whitmores, my family, the ones who had raised me, they were part of this betrayal. They were involved in my kidnapping. Not out of malice, but out of some misguided attempt to protect me from something worse. "You were a tool in a game we never wanted you to play," Magnus had said, his voice rough with regret. The words stuck in my mind like a splinter. I was just a tool? A pawn in some twisted game? Was that all I had ever been? A means to an end, a way for others to protect themselves from their own messes? I felt the anger surge inside me, hotter and sharper than ever. The Whitmores, my adoptive family, had been manipulating me from the very start. But Magnus had been a part of it, too. He'd known about my kidnapping. He'd known I was taken for my own protection, but that didn't make it any less painful. They had stolen my life, my memories, everything that should have been mine. I had thought I could move forward. But now, everything I thought I knew was crumbling. The lies, the secrets, it was too much to take in all at once. I couldn't just sit there and let it all wash over me. I needed to do something. I needed to reclaim what had been taken from me. But first, I had to face the reality of the situation. I had to face Magnus, the man who had been part of this mess, and the man who might have the answers I needed. But how could I trust him? How could I trust anyone now? The thought of going back to the Whitmores, of confronting them about their role in everything, made my stomach churn. They had cut me out of their lives so easily. But they didn't know me anymore. I wasn't the same person I had been when I left that house. I had been silent, docile, and afraid. But now? Now, I wasn't afraid anymore. The truth about my adoption hit me like a punch to the gut. Magnus handed me another document. It was proof that I had been taken away and adopted, and proof that my biological mother had loved me, that she had wanted me to know the truth. But it didn't make things easier. The truth hurt. It didn't heal the wounds, it opened them up again. You're a pawn in a war that's been over for years. But you are not alone in this, Magnus said, his voice quiet. I shook my head. It doesn't matter, I muttered. You can't just undo what was done. As much as I wanted to hate him, to hate the Whitmores, I couldn't deny what had been laid bare in front of me. My life had been manipulated by both sides, but who was I to blame? Was I just supposed to accept it? I felt trapped. Part of me wanted to run, to leave all of this behind and pretend it never happened. But another part of me, the part that had been silenced for so long, knew that wasn't an option. I couldn't just turn my back on the truth. Not anymore. Magnus handed me the letter my biological mother had written. The words in the letter weren't just words, they were my past, my life that had been stolen. She had begged for my forgiveness, said she had never wanted this life for me. She wanted me to know the truth, to find out who I really was when the time was right. I'm not your puppet anymore, I said to Magnus, my voice steady. It's time for the truth to come out. Magnus's eyes softened, and for a moment, I saw the man he used to be, the father who never got to raise me. But the anger I felt for what the Whitmores had done to me, for what they had taken from me, made it hard to see anything clearly. I couldn't just forgive them. I couldn't just forget all the years I had lost. I left the estate, my mind racing with 1,000 thoughts. I had made my decision. I had to confront the Whitmores. I had to demand answers. They had already cast me aside once, but they wouldn't do it again. Not without facing the truth. When I made the call to the Whitmore mansion, I wasn't prepared for the response I got. Alexis, the voice on the other end of the line said, and I could tell it was my father. You don't want to do this. I'm not your puppet anymore, I said, my voice cold. I'm done hiding. I need to speak to you. Now. The tension was thick as the silence on the other end stretched on. And when the voice finally spoke again, it was colder than I had ever heard it. The money was never yours, my father said, his tone sharp. You were never meant to have it. My heart skipped a beat. The inheritance, the money, the $310 million I thought was my birthright, it was never meant to be mine. The Whitmores had always known this. They had always kept me at arm's length because they knew I was never the rightful heir. I stared at the phone in my hand, my vision blurry with rage. We'll see about that, I said, my voice steady despite the storm inside me. And with that, the line went dead. I stood outside the Grand Whitmore mansion, my breath shallow and my heart hammering in my chest. The moment I had been building toward had arrived. There was no turning back now. Every part of me wanted to hesitate, to turn around and pretend none of this had ever happened. But I couldn't. I was done being passive. Done letting them control my life. I took a deep breath, steadying myself as I walked up the steps. The door swung open before I could even knock, and I was face to face with Richard Whitmore, the man who had once been my father in name only. His cold eyes flickered over me, and for a brief second, I wondered if he saw anything of his old daughter in me. I doubted it. I wasn't the naive girl who had once cowered in his shadow. This is my moment to reclaim everything they tried to take from me, I muttered to myself, before stepping inside. The mansion's interior was as grand as ever, shiny floors, expensive art, the smell of wealth in the air. But to me, it all felt hollow. A prison of gold bars and lies. I didn't come here for their charity. I didn't come to be their puppet. I came for the truth, and for what was rightfully mine. I was led into the grand dining room where the Whitmores were already seated, waiting for me. There was Magnus, his expression unreadable, And Richard, his eyes cold as usual. I had never felt more out of place in this house. Magnus stood first. Alexis, come. Sit. His voice was softer than I remembered, but there was still that underlying condescension. The way they all spoke to me like I was some charity case, some problem they could fix with a conversation. I didn't come here for your charity, I said firmly, refusing to take the seat he offered. I came here for what's mine. A tense silence hung in the air. I saw Richard's lips curl into a sneer as he leaned back in his chair, arms folded across his chest. Magnus, on the other hand, looked almost weary. You still don't understand, do you? He asked, his tone filled with both regret and anger. We did this to protect you. Protect me? I scoffed. From what? From the truth? Or from your lies? Magnus's face tightened, and he exhaled sharply, as though he was about to say something he'd held in for far too long. It wasn't just your family that took you, Alexis, he said, his voice low, eyes searching mine for some sign of understanding. The Whitmores didn't just do this for power or money. We did it to protect you from a much darker world, a world your biological family was tied to. A world that would have destroyed you. I felt a chill run through me. My heart raced as the room seemed to close in. What was he saying? They were involved in a criminal organization, he continued, his voice laced with guilt. We saved you from becoming their tool. I couldn't breathe. The world spun around me. The betrayal ran deeper than I could have ever imagined. They hadn't just stolen me from my real family. They'd stolen me to protect me from something far worse. I didn't know whether to be grateful, furious, or terrified. Wait. My voice barely broke through the silence. You're telling me, you took me because my biological family was involved in something illegal? The words tasted like ash in my mouth. Magnus nodded solemnly. We did it to keep you safe, Alexis. Your real parents were in danger. They never wanted this for you. But when they couldn't protect you anymore, we had to step in. I felt a wave of confusion. My mind raced, but I couldn't catch up. I wanted to scream, to demand answers. But there was something else, something that felt like compassion? I didn't know how to process it. Magnus handed me a document, and I took it from his hands. My gaze dropped to it, and the first thing I saw was the familiar names, Magnus and Eleanor Carver. This was my real family's name. The shock hit me like a punch to the gut, but it wasn't over. I opened the letter, written by my biological mother before she died. Her words were raw, desperate, but filled with love. She had known that one day I would find out the truth. She had written that she had always hoped I would forgive her for not being able to raise me. She had known the dangers her family faced, but never imagined they would have to give me up for my own safety. The letter ended with her plea for me to forgive her, to understand that it was never her choice. I don't know who I am anymore, I whispered, the weight of everything crashing over me. Who am I? A pawn in this game? Magnus's voice softened, but his eyes were filled with regret. You were never meant to be taken from us, Alexis. Your mother loved you. We all did. I wanted to scream at him, to tell him that nothing would ever make up for the years I had lost. But I couldn't. Part of me understood now. Part of me knew that no matter how much I wanted to hate the Whitmores, they had done what they thought was best. But that didn't change what they had taken from me. My hands trembled as I thought of the Whitmores, my adoptive family, the people who had cast me aside, who had never truly loved me. All these years, I had longed for their approval, their love. But they had never given it freely. They had never seen me as their own. The anger that had been building in me finally broke free. You can't rewrite my past. But I can define my future. I stepped back, taking a deep breath as I gathered my thoughts. I wasn't going to be a victim anymore. I wasn't going to let them control me. And with that, I made a decision. I called Richard. I called the Whitmores. It was time to confront them about the truth they had hidden for so long. I'm not your pawn anymore, I said, my voice unwavering. I'm taking what's mine, and there's nothing you can do to stop me. The tension in the room thickened as I spoke those words. But there was something else, something stronger than my anger. It was empowerment. I wasn't afraid anymore. But just as I was about to leave, Magnus tried one last time to offer me a way out. Alexis, he said, desperation in his voice. Please. We can still make this right. We can fix everything. Just let it go. I looked him in the eye and knew then that I had already won. This isn't over, I said, my voice steady. Not by long shot. And with that, I walked away, knowing the battle was far from over, but I had just begun to fight for what was truly mine. I stood in front of the mirror, feeling the weight of the moment pressing down on me. My reflection stared back, a mix of determination and unease. The Whitmores had already shown me what they were capable of, manipulating me, trying to control my every move. But now, things were different. I was no longer the naive girl they could twist around. No, this was my fight, and I was done being passive. The calm before the storm was suffocating, but I needed it. I needed this quiet to prepare myself, to gather the courage that had been building inside me for months. This was my turning point. I wasn't just fighting for money or property anymore. It was bigger than that. It was about reclaiming what had been stolen from me, my life, my identity, and my right to be free. I picked up the documents from the desk, each one heavy with the truth I had uncovered. The Whitmores had tried to hide it, but I had gathered every shred of evidence, every letter, every piece of paper that proved their lies. This wasn't just about the inheritance. It was about taking back my voice and demanding the respect I had always been denied. It's not just about the money anymore. It's about taking back what was stolen from me, I whispered under my breath, steeling myself for the confrontation ahead. I put on my jacket, squared my shoulders, and walked out the door. It was time. The Whitmores were waiting for me, expecting me to be the same old person. But I wasn't. The moment I stepped into their mansion, I could feel the tension. Richard stood there, his arms crossed, watching me with a look of disdain. Magnus was beside him, a cold smile playing on his lips. "You still don't realize how small you are in this game, Alexis," Magnus said, his voice dripping with condescension. The words stung, but they didn't hold power over me anymore. I met his gaze with the same coldness he had shown me. "I'm not here to play games," I said, my voice steady. "I'm here to take back what's mine." I could see the shift in their eyes, a flicker of surprise, then suspicion. They hadn't expected this. They hadn't expected me to fight back. But it was too late. I wasn't backing down. Not now. Not ever. As the conversation wore on, the pressure from the Whitmores became more apparent. Magnus tried to strike a deal, to offer me a portion of the inheritance in exchange for my silence. "You don't have to do this, Alexis," he said, his tone softer now, like he was trying to calm me. "You don't know what you're walking into." But I wasn't listening. I had heard enough lies from him already. "I didn't come here for your charity," I shot back. "I came here for what's mine." Magnus's expression hardened, but I could see the underlying fear. He knew I wasn't backing down, and that realization made him dangerous. Then came the revelation, something that changed everything. Magnus, almost reluctantly, admitted that the Whitmores hadn't just taken me to control me, but to protect me. He said my biological family had been involved in a criminal organization, and the Whitmores had to step in to save me from becoming their pawn. For a moment, I felt the ground shift beneath me. The anger and confusion that had been building in me all these years wavered as a flicker of doubt crept in. Was I really better off with them? Had they truly protected me? "They were involved in a criminal organization," Magnus explained, his voice heavy with regret. "We saved you from becoming their tool." I didn't know what to believe anymore. Part of me wanted to scream, to lash out at him for everything he had done. But another part of me, one I hated, felt a strange sense of gratitude. They hadn't just stolen me, they had saved me, or so they claimed. Then, as if to solidify the truth, Magnus handed me a folder filled with documents. It was the proof I needed to confirm everything. My real family, my biological parents, were part of something dangerous, and the Whitmores had taken me to protect me. But none of that mattered. Not really. "You're not in charge anymore. I hold the cards now," I said, my voice firm, resolute. The truth was mine to control now, not theirs. And just as I was about to leave, I was interrupted by an unexpected ally. A voice from behind me startled me. "I've been watching. They don't deserve your trust." I spun around to find someone I never thought would help me, one of the Whitmores' own associates. A man who had been silently supporting me all along. He handed me a set of key documents that further discredited the Whitmores, proving my suspicions right. I stared at the papers, my heart racing as the walls around me seemed to crumble. I wasn't alone. I wasn't fighting this battle by myself anymore. With this new evidence, the power dynamic shifted. I wasn't just the victim in their story, I was taking control of my own narrative. "I'm taking what's mine," I declared to the room, my voice unwavering. "This is my inheritance. This is my life, and you no longer have a say in it." Magnus's face darkened, but there was nothing he could do now. The battle for control was mine, and I had won. But just as I thought the fight was over, a new complication arose. A phone call interrupted the moment. The voice on the other end sent a chill down my spine. "You think you've won, Alexis?" The voice sneered. "This is just the beginning." I froze, the weight of the threat sinking in. The battle wasn't over. It had only just begun. The weight of everything that had happened over the past few days was starting to suffocate me. I had been going through the motions, playing the game they wanted me to play, but now I felt the pressure building. With every lie, every manipulation, the anger inside me grew. The Whitmores wouldn't back down, they never did. They had already shown me what they were capable of, and I knew they would stop at nothing to regain control of everything they thought was theirs. I sat in my apartment, the only place that still felt like it was mine, trying to make sense of it all. The walls seemed to close in, and I could feel my nerves fraying. The weight of the decisions ahead of me threatened to crush me, but I couldn't let myself crumble. I had come too far to turn back now. With the Whitmores refusing to yield, I knew the next move had to be mine. I couldn't let them win. Not after everything. The documents spread across the table in front of me reminded me of how far I'd come. They weren't just papers, they were pieces of my life that I had fought for. Every shred of evidence, every letter, every recorded conversation, each one brought me closer to the truth. "It's not just about the money anymore. It's about taking back what was stolen from me," I whispered under my breath. I stood up, wiping the sweat off my palms, my mind made up. The fire inside me burned brighter than before. There was no more hesitation. I had to face them, face the Whitmores, and show them that I wasn't a pawn anymore. The doorbell rang, snapping me out of my thoughts. I took a deep breath, bracing myself for what was coming. Magnus had tried to manipulate me before, and I knew he'd try again. I couldn't allow myself to be weak. Not this time. Not ever again. I arrived at the Whitmore estate, and the tension in the air was thick. Magnus was waiting for me, the same cold smile on his face. I had come to expect it by now, but today, it felt different. This time, I wasn't intimidated. This time, I was in control. "You still don't realize how small you are in this game, Alexis," he said, his voice dripping with condescension. His words didn't sting like they used to. They barely registered. I walked into the room with my head held high, meeting his gaze with the same coldness he'd shown me over the years. "I'm not here to play games," I said firmly. "I'm here to take back what's mine." The shift in the room was palpable. The smugness that had been there just moments ago vanished. For a moment, I saw something else in his eyes, fear. Magnus, realizing his hold over me was slipping, offered me a deal. "You don't have to go down this road, Alexis," he said, his tone softer now, almost pleading. "You don't have to destroy everything. Just walk away, and we'll make sure you're taken care of." I could feel my anger rising, but I kept my voice steady. "You think you can buy me out like you bought everything else?" I scoffed. "I'm not for sale." He didn't respond, but I could see the wheels turning in his head. He wasn't used to being denied, and the realization that he couldn't control me anymore was a bitter pill for him to swallow. But there was more. Magnus had one final attempt up his sleeve. He had no idea I had already uncovered everything. He didn't know I had the upper hand now. As the conversation continued, the tension reached its peak. I revealed everything. I had already learned the truth about why I was taken. The Whitmores hadn't done it for the money, as they'd claimed. They'd taken me to protect me from my own family. The truth was worse than I'd imagined. My biological parents had been involved in something much darker, a criminal organization that would have used me as a pawn. Magnus's face hardened, and he gave me a twisted version of the truth. "We saved you from them, Alexis," he said, his voice full of regret. "We had no choice." I felt everything I had worked for slipping away. the anger building as I realized how little control I had ever really had. But I wasn't going to let them win. Not now. Enough, I said, my voice cold. I'm done playing by your rules. I turned to leave, gathering the documents that would change everything. But just as I reached the door, I received a call from one of the lawyers. The news made my heart drop. There had been a last-minute change in the will, something I hadn't anticipated. What do you mean, it's all been a lie? I demanded. The reality of the situation hit me hard. All my plans, all my work, could be undone in an instant. I hung up, my mind spinning. This wasn't how it was supposed to end. The victory I had been so sure of was suddenly slipping through my fingers. But I wasn't done. Not yet. I stormed back into the Whitmore's mansion. My anger boiled over, and the need to take control overwhelmed me. I demanded they give me what was rightfully mine. No more games. No more lies. You'll never control me again, I said, my voice unwavering. Not this time. Not ever. The confrontation escalated. The Whitmores tried to make one final push, to manipulate me, but it was too late. I had all the evidence I needed, and I wasn't going to back down. But just as I thought I had won, I felt a chill run down my spine. As I exited the mansion, I heard the unmistakable sound of a voice calling out to me from the shadows. This isn't over, Alexis. Not by long shot. I froze, my heart racing. It wasn't over. Not by long shot. The day had arrived. The one I had been dreading and preparing for, the final confrontation with the Whitmores. As I stood in front of the mirror, the weight of everything I had gone through hit me all at once. I wasn't just fighting for an inheritance anymore, I was fighting for my identity, for my place in a world that had never truly accepted me. The documents in my hands, the evidence I had painstakingly gathered over the last few weeks, were more than just papers. They were my future. I had come too far to let them slip through my fingers now. I checked the documents again, making sure everything was in order, as if one last confirmation could give me the strength I needed to face them. It wasn't just about winning anymore. It was about reclaiming what was rightfully mine. I've come too far to back down now. No more second chances, I muttered to myself. My voice sounded steady, but inside, I was a storm. The Whitmores weren't going to go down easily. I knew that. And as I walked out the door, I felt the tension mounting in my chest, but there was also a spark of resolve. I wasn't going to be manipulated by them again. Not after everything they had done to me. I was in control now. When I arrived at the Whitmore estate, the atmosphere was different. The air felt colder, heavier. Magnus was there, standing in the foyer like he always had, stoic, confident, as though nothing had changed. But I saw it in his eyes, the flicker of panic hidden beneath his composed exterior. He knew this was it. "You think you can just walk in and take everything?" he said with that same patronizing tone he always used. "You abandoned us when it mattered most." The words cut deeper than I expected. There it was, his final attempt to manipulate me, to make me question everything. But I was done questioning. I had seen through all of his lies. "I didn't abandon anyone," I said, my voice surprisingly calm. "I was abandoned, Magnus. And now I'm taking back what's mine." For a brief moment, doubt crept into my mind. Was I just doing this out of revenge? Was I no better than they were? The guilt gnawed at me, but it wasn't enough to stop me. I had a right to fight for my future, and that's exactly what I was going to do. Alone in a quiet moment before the final showdown, I reflected on how far I had come. The Whitmores had used me as a pawn for too long, and now it was my turn to take control. But I had to remind myself that this wasn't just about revenge. It was about justice. What if I'm just as bad as they are? I thought to myself. What if I'm just doing this for revenge? The doubt lingered, but I quickly pushed it aside. I had already been through enough. I wasn't doing this for anyone but myself. I picked up the phone and dialed the lawyer. "It's time," I said, my voice firm. "Let's finalize the paperwork." The next few moments were a blur. I gathered everything I needed, documents, evidence, the proof that would expose them once and for all. The Whitmores had no idea what was coming. This wasn't a negotiation anymore, it was a fight for my life. I walked back into the Whitmore mansion, my heart pounding in my chest. I wasn't nervous anymore. The time for hesitation was over. I was ready. I stepped into the living room, where the family had gathered, Magnus, his associates, and a few others who had been too silent in all this. It was time to lay it all out. "This is my inheritance," I said, holding up the documents. "And you won't take it from me." The room fell silent. They tried to hide their surprise, but I could see it in their eyes. Magnus's face twisted in disbelief, but there was no turning back now. The battle had been fought, and I was standing at the finish line. But just as I thought I had won, the unexpected happened. One of the lawyers stepped forward, holding a new document in hand. The smile I had barely allowed myself to wear vanished as he read aloud. The will had been altered at the last minute. The inheritance had changed hands, and it wasn't going to me. I froze, my heart sinking in my chest. "What do you mean, it's all been a lie?" I demanded, my voice shaking. It couldn't be true. Everything I had worked for, everything I had fought for, gone in an instant. The betrayal hit harder than I expected, the weight of it crashing down on me like a wave. "There's more you don't know, Alexis," the lawyer said, his voice cold. "And this changes everything." I didn't know what to feel. Betrayal, shock, anger, everything blurred into one. This wasn't the end. It was a twist. A final act in the game I had thought I was winning. And it wasn't over yet. The weight of the battle was finally over. But as I stood outside the Whitmore estate, watching the towering mansion in front of me, it didn't feel like a victory. My body was drained, my emotions scattered. I had fought for so long, and now, it was done. But somehow, it didn't feel like closure. The past still loomed over me, its shadow casting doubt on the future I thought I'd finally secured. The money, the power, the victory, none of it had been able to undo the years of hurt, the years of manipulation. As I stood there, taking in the moment, I realized how far I had come. I wasn't just fighting for an inheritance anymore. I was fighting for myself. And yet, the past still clung to me, like an old wound that refused to heal. "It's over," I whispered, but even I didn't believe it. But somehow, the past still lingers. The phone call came not long after. The lawyers had finally made their decision. I had been waiting for this moment, the moment when everything I had fought for would come to fruition. The words the lawyer spoke were almost a blur, but they didn't need to be. I had already heard them 1,000 times in my head. "The court has ruled in your favor, Alexis. The Whitmores no longer have control. You are the rightful heir." It was real. It was happening. The empire that the Whitmores had controlled for so long was finally in my hands. The estate, the fortune, it all belonged to me now. It was mine. "This estate belongs to you, Alexis. The law has spoken," the lawyer added. I should have felt triumphant, but there was no joy in this victory. Instead, a strange sense of closure washed over me. It wasn't just about the money anymore. It was about being free from their control. It was about proving that I was more than just a pawn in their game. But now that the battle was won, what came next? For so long, my life had been shaped by the fight. But now, with that fight behind me, I had to figure out who I really was, beyond the Whitmores, beyond the inheritance. The next step was clear: I had to rebuild my life, piece by piece. No longer shackled by the past, I began to focus on the future. Reconnecting with people who had always been there for me, friends, family, and even old acquaintances who had supported me along the way. These were the people who mattered. Not the Whitmores. Not their lies. "I don't need the past to define me anymore," I said to myself. "It's time for a new chapter." The Whitmores' downfall came swiftly. Their reputation, built on years of deceit and manipulation, crumbled in an instant. The media ate it up, and for once, it wasn't me being torn apart by their lies. It was them. "They thought they could break me, but they were wrong," I muttered as I watched the news coverage of their public disgrace. Their fall from grace wasn't just my victory, it was a victory for anyone who had ever been a victim of their cruelty. As I watched them struggle to maintain their power, I realized that their influence had never been what mattered. It was the people who supported me, the ones who stood by me through it all, who had always been the real foundation of my strength. In the end, I did something the Whitmores had never even considered. I restructured the estate, not just to preserve the wealth, but to make it work for something greater than ourselves. I started a philanthropic initiative, ensuring that the family fortune would be used to help others, to make the world a better place, rather than fueling the greed and entitlement that had driven the Whitmores for so long. This is what my family's legacy should have been about, giving back, not tearing others down, I said as I finalized the plans. It was my way of rewriting history, turning a legacy of abuse into one of hope. And finally, as the dust settled, I found a moment of peace. Sitting in the garden, the sun dipping low on the horizon, I reflected on the journey I had been through. The pain, the betrayal, the anger, it was all behind me now. I had taken control of my life. And for the first time, I could breathe easy. The past is gone, I whispered to myself, I am free.